Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, welcome to the opening of the AI Under the Stars live event series organized by the Public Policy Research Center and the Serbian AI Society with the support of the Center for the Promotion of Science. Tonight, we are thrilled to explore the captivating topic of the AI and the public interest, scope and limitations of the use in the public sector. Throughout this event, we aim to delve into the potential and boundaries of artificial intelligence implementation in the public sector, both in Serbia and on global scale. With the help of our esteemed experts, we will shed light on how AI can enhance governance, improve access to services, and establish higher standards of accountability. Before we proceed, I would like to introduce you to several rules for this panel. First, feel free to grab either water or food whenever you like. Second, we expect to have 3 rounds of questions, so please prepare your questions before the 3rd round, even though if you think that you may contribute to the discussion even before that, feel free to do that. Without further ado, allow me to introduce our distinguished panel of experts. Tijago K, if I pronounced well, serves as a senior public sector specialist at the World Bank. His extensive knowledge will contribute significantly to our understanding of how technology, particularly AI, can benefit public administration and governance. Slobodan Marković is an advisor on digital technologies at the United Nations Development Program in Serbia. His invaluable insights into AI implementation in the public sector, both locally and globally, will provide us with a comprehensive perspective. Boban Stojanović is a professor at the Department of Mathematics and Informatics, Faculty of Science, University of Kragujevac. With his expertise in these domains and his research on AI applications, he will offer us an academic as well as practical viewpoint on the topic. Branka Anđelković is the co-founder and program director of the Public Policy Research Center in Belgrade. Her deep understanding of public policy and engagement in AI-related research will contribute to our exploration of the subject. My name is Tanja Jacobi. I'm executive director of the Public Policy Research Center, and tonight I have the privilege of guiding our discussion on the fascinating topic of AI in the public sector. Preparing for such a discussion can be quite challenging, as evidence regarding the use of AI in the public sector is still relatively scarce. As some researchers have pointed out, when compared to other areas such as business, the utilization of AI in the public sphere is still in its infancy. The fact may come as a surprise, considering that public administration generates an enormous amount of data and constantly strives to improve its productivity by streamlining staff and enhancing accountability. I will first turn to Slobodan, actually to introduce us to the topic and tell us where in the public administration AI is finding its best use.
Okay. Well, I think that we have to recognize two separate but intertwined roles of the government. The first one is the government as a user, meaning the whole application of AI within the government, and the second one is the government as a regulator, so meaning AI policy and governance. So when it comes to the use of AI in the government, I see the biggest potential in anything related to processing language, because language, both in the form of voice and text, is predominant in the public sector, and there ChatGPT can be used in not only for drafting talking points or memos or for policy research, but there are also huge potentials for knowledge mining and semantic search over vast government archives of unstructured documents, meaning like memos or laws or various decisions. For instance, for making legal text more accessible through paraphrasing, like paraphrase this so a student can understand. or using voice transcription for improving accessibility of government sessions, parliament sessions, and these kinds of technologies. But of course, there's much more to just text processing. There are also good use cases in computer vision and other predictive models, and I think that Boban will talk more about that. On this topic, I think that also GovTech, the concept where government involves private sector and especially startups, the unusual suspects, into bringing innovations in the government could be a good avenue for cooperation. But it requires, government's commitment and also existence of a champion within the government for this initiative. Now, when it comes to the second part of government as a regulator, I'll highlight a few things which our government did good, but also something that awaits us in the future. The first and I would say important thing is, for a government to have a vision, how does it want to go about implementing AI, and our government adopted this kind of strategy in 2019. By the end of this year, we should have a new action plan for the next 2 years. The second important aspect is to manage risks and build trust in these technologies. And our government, in this regard, adopted the ethical framework for AI, but it shouldn't be only focused on private sector use of AI, but also government should also commit itself to upholding human rights and transparency. And this includes refraining from using AI in certain high-risk scenarios, like, for instance, tracking persons in public spaces using biometry. Then the big role in government is actually to create the capacity for using AI, and the establishment of the AI Institute is a good example in this regard, where we have a Center of Excellence for AI with more than 30 researchers over there. And finally, government as someone who is leading by doing, where the government is currently engaged in implementing some approximately dozen pilot projects for implementing AI in the public sector, ranging from knowledge miners to computer vision for improving cancer detection on CT scans, improving railway safety using computer vision, to, for instance, autonomous driving. But there are also a few things which are awaiting us in the future, and I'd like to highlight there that probably in the years ahead we'll have to adopt a harder, more strict legal regime for use of AI, probably something alike to EU's AI Act, which is in the final stages of negotiation. We will have to equip or build capacity across the board of our regulators to tackle to first anticipate and then to tackle consequences of using AI in different sectors. For our government institutions to become better in working with data, which is the basis for AI, meaning not only improving the governance of data through the life cycle, but also working with the private sector and getting closer to real time, like, for instance, using big data from the mobile operators, satellite operators, e-commerce platform, etc. And finally, I would say fixing blind spots in the current strategy, which, in my point of view, misses a couple of important things, like bigger focus on language technologies, on processing Serbian using AI, and I would say a bigger focus on supporting the ecosystem, like events like this. And finally, bringing more incentives for the private sector to actually adopt AI and also advanced data analytics. So this would be all in short.
Thank you very much. We will turn later also to this legal part. Now I would like to turn to Slobodan. One of the cases in which you will often see that people are thinking about the use of artificial intelligence is related to energy, and it's related to management of crises which are caused by natural disasters. So Boban, please let us know your experience with working actually in this sector.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to this panel and for giving me an opportunity to share my thoughts about the application of artificial intelligence in public sector. And as you said in the introduction, I'm a professor, but also a founder of spin-off company Vodena that deals with the software solutions for the application in water and energy sectors, where we intensively use artificial intelligence to solve various real-world problems, such as power production optimization, or water management optimization, or flood prevention, and so on. So where is connection between these things and the public sector and with the society? At the beginning, we have to understand the ongoing transformation of energy sector, which will make us not only buyers and consumers of electricity as a product, but members of a wider, let's say, society and energy ecosystem, which will be actually society, human-machine society that will have its own rules, and where energy will be the main interconnecting fluid between all these elements. All of us know that traditional energy systems consist mainly of few power plants that produce energy, then use transmission systems to transfer the energy across country, and then distribute that energy and sell it to houses, to public venues, to factories, and so on. However, electricity is not like other commodities, because it still cannot be efficiently stored and must be produced in the amounts that are exactly the same as current demand. And distribution system operators, their role is from hour to hour and even from minute to minute to balance production on one side and consumption on the other side. That is very complicated process. However, with introduction of renewable energy resources, such as solar panels and wind turbines, every single household can become not only consumer of the electricity, but also producer of the electricity. We call them prosumers, which will totally change the game. So can you imagine how complicated it will be to orchestrate all these elements of some system? For example, when we have in Europe millions of both producers and consumers of the energy, and that is such a complicated system. I dare to say organism that for which orchestration we cannot use traditional engineering and administration methods. We need something much better. That organism needs its own brain, and for that purpose we need artificial intelligence, for sure. On the other hand, when we talk about water sector, all of us are witnesses of catastrophic events that are consequences of climate change. And a few weeks ago we had catastrophic floods here in Serbia, many destroyed roads, houses, broken bridges, and so on. If we want to predict these events and to prevent them and to save human lives, we need much better mechanism than current engineering and administration methods. And for that purpose, we also need artificial intelligence.
You said organism, and then you said a different brain, and somehow it seems that humans are somehow missing from this picture. So if you can just shed a light of where the humans will be within this new organism and new brain.
I'm afraid that people from technology cannot give you answer on that question. I believe that people like you from human sciences and from social sciences have to find solution to those challenges.
Okay, that's why I will turn to Tiago actually to to discuss artificial intelligence.
Because for our from technology side, it is all exciting. We will push technology, we will push because it is exciting for us to move boundaries. But people from social scientists have to take care to keep that in some boundaries, human boundaries.
So from the very beginning, we were talking about not just about artificial intelligence or public sector, but also about society. And we were talking about prosumers, so people who will suddenly interact with the system in a way which is much more exciting and different than just users. And this also organism and brain and everything which somehow squeezes humans to some sidelines really leads me to the question to Tiago, which is related to participatory democracy and view of AI and its role from that perspective.
Thank you. By the way, I'm looking at my phone because of notes. I'm not talking to anybody. But if my colleagues see me saying something stupid, you do send a note here and I'll see. So no, I mean, I think on the issue of AI and participatory democracy, right? And just to make it clear what we're talking about, participatory democracy is involving citizens in government decision-making outside of electoral processes, right? So it is really trying to get citizens to participate in government decisions on budgeting. So there's the case of participatory budgeting or citizens' assemblies in which the government invites the public to decide on an important issue and makes issues. And hopefully the government implements these recommendations. But so it's interesting at the issue of artificial intelligence because and participatory democracy, because one of the drivers of participatory democracy is the notion of collective intelligence, right? So it is how do you leverage the knowledge that is dispersed among a population that in a way that you can come up with better public decisions towards societal good. So the reason for that is that, as many of you might have faced in your life, is that sometimes our political elected representatives, they don't seem to be to bring all the collective intelligence that we would like them to bring. Right? So, but one of the challenges in doing participatory decision-making processes, one of the big challenges of this, there are several, if you want to bring them to scale. Because in collective intelligence, the higher the diversity of people and the highest the number, the smarter the crowd is, right? But the challenge for that is to bring that to scale, right? And there are many challenges that come with that. One is language. So for instance, Europe tried to do consultations here Europe-wide, right? But I mean, it costs a fortune doing simultaneous translation with all the time and so on. So it's an inhibiting factor. And there AI has a great role to play. The other one is also on mediation, because when you put citizens to talk, you need a mediator, right? So that you make everybody can talk. And now there are already tools that are being developed to try to have AI to act as a mediator of discussions virtually. So it helps also to overcome that barrier. Now, things start to get complicated and funny when you start to think of other uses of AI that you could do, right? So for instance, citizens with less education, when you put them to discuss, many times, they don't have the eloquence, the argumentative quality that more educated citizens have, which creates a problem, right? We see this particularly in online deliberations processes, particularly because then kind of like grammar mistakes become more pronounced and so on, and their ideas are not so taken into account, which undermines collective intelligence. So one of the things that AI could be helping, it is what if AI could look at, I write something there and I say, well, I think this matter is important, and AI comes and says, well, here's a more persuasive way for you to say that, and also with better grammar, with a more convincing language, right? That sounds great, but what if everybody starts to use that? Then you just have AI talking to AI, and then like the citizen disappears off the equation ultimately. Another thing that people are talking is about AI and representative democracy. some ideas a bit kind of like forward-looking, but I mean, lots of things that are happening nowadays we didn't think would happen, which is creating digital twins of yourself, right? So, I mean, it's very easy nowadays to know by how many likes I give or anything, for instance, on who I vote. And it's very easy to predict with high accuracy what is my stance without saying anything online, just by what I like, what I shop, and so on, and what I read online, whether I'm pro-abortion or not, right? So could you have a digital twin, right, in which you would be participating in several processes, just aggregating your preferences and doing that? I mean, if you think that's crazy enough, that's an idea from a professor at the Center for Collective Intelligence in France, peopledemocracy.com, in which they talk about this. And there are some people even starting to advocate that you should have AI, instead of elected representatives, you should have your AI people. It seems far-fetched, but I mean, go to Japan and you have Keiko, which was an AI robot, which actually ran for local elections and gained lots of votes, right? So there are things going that way. And now just to conclude, where are the people in the equation, right? I think we talk about AI for participatory democracy, but I think we need also to think about participatory democracy for AI, right? It's no coincidence that OpenAI just launched a call, I think 150,000 grants, a series of grants on how you can leverage participatory democracy to do the governance of AI. A great example of participatory democracy for AI is actually the algorithm, not for AI, but for like solutions. It's the algorithm for the allocation of kidney transplants in the United States, right? Because knowing who gets a kidney is extremely difficult. And it has like moral issues, technical issues. Do I give to who is like 20 years old or 80 years old? Or do we leave the person who's maybe older, who lives closer, or so on? And was a participatory process that actually led to a pretty good performing algorithm for such an important matter. And it was done through a participatory process. No coincidence, the head of public policy of OpenAI now, it is the person who wrote the book about this, which I recommend for those interested, which is called Voices in the Code. So I think the way that we bring people into the equation is going to be precisely through participatory democracy.
Thank you very much. Until now, we were talking about state and artificial intelligence in a way that we understand what is the artificial intelligence doing, how it can serve us, what are the possibilities, what are the challenges. But now I'm turning to Branka actually to talk about something else, about artificial intelligence in a way going through the business sector and basically finding society or state and policymakers actually not very well prepared for what she was bringing, for example, in the area of work. So Branka, I will now ask you to talk about our experience from the research, about the role of artificial intelligence, which is not regulated for now very well, and it's producing a lot of different consequences. And it still has to be regulated. So on this turn, we will start to think about regulation again, but first.
From a different angle. I'm not even sure that I need a mic, but in case I do need it, then I think this is a safe distance. So don't worry, this is not, these notes are just for me. I always feel much safer if I have the paper in my hands. So I think AI is a good news for business, but not so good news when it comes to workers and citizens. And this is at least the perception that we, as a research organization, have had in the last couple of years, doing, let's say, pioneering research. I would like to say that, and I would like to think that this is the case, about platform work. This small segment of labor market, in a way, pioneered and opened a space for understanding how algorithmic management, which is like a basic model, I think, when it comes to all this new technology, how it actually affects workers and in what ways. When we started doing our research, we just realized that workers have been exposed to a number of problems that relate, for example, to algorithmic management and control of tasks that these workers are doing. And this was kind of, in a way, okay. I mean, nobody really took care of it. Until the moment when a number of legislators and I would say law action started in Europe to raise the issue of workers' rights. That was one. Moving actually from workers' rights to algorithmic management. And it sounded kind of funky. You know, why would you link these two together? But there was a reason why. Because actually algorithmic management was at the essence of this business model that nobody really paid attention to. So what happened on the regulatory sky? 5 years ago, there was, let's say, a beginning of talks about EU directive on improving the status of platform workers in reality. Let's put it this way. Part of this regulation also devotes to algorithmic management. Long story short, 5 years later, here we are where we are. This piece of legislation has been widely discussed in very small number of circles. We tend to believe that this was like a huge and massive discussion, but actually it was not. Good news is that this summer, in June, European Council finally passed this piece of legislation for a new step, which is trialogue discussion and so on and so forth. You know how it goes with the EU. You start the discussion, let's say, in 2010 and maybe finish a piece of legislation in 2030. And in the meantime, all the people that you're dealing with are actually dead. So in this case, it was not really the case. And we have this piece of legislation being moved and adopted. And the reason is now why. AI and ChatGPT, I think, really brought all this sudden change to pushing directive and also thinking about other workers. Because so far we've been only discussing riders, we've been discussing delivery workers, and this is like, you know, underrepresented segment of society in any society, and also in Serbian society. Who cares about these people? But because of ChatGPT and because of large language models, all of a sudden, the realm of work became so important. All these forecasts about catastrophic events, how many jobs are going to be lost, how many people are going to be laid, how many people need to be skilled, reskilled, and so on and so forth, actually, we're pushing for a new piece of legislation, and we have it now. And this is the EU AI Act. I always forget, you know, what comes first. And this piece of legislation actually now has been also passed in June by the European Parliament with the aim to regulate in a way, and this is not the only piece of legislation, to regulate the space of work and also the space where we as citizens live. We will see how long it is going to take to see all these regulatory attempts to become reality. We hope sooner rather than later, but it takes time for one thing to change. And we know that, for example, Amazon, we started its business, when was that, like 20 years ago? And not only Amazon, we also have Uber and other businesses, are just now, in a way, entering the space of regulation, 20 years later. So let's see what is going to happen next. And let's hope that these regulatory attempts are going to be actually in favor of workers and citizens.
Thank you. Before I proceed with the legislation, I would also like to ask several questions related to other gaps. And one of these gaps would be that, as you all mentioned, language. So, for example, if we think about how we use GPT chat, we see that it's getting much better in Serbian, for example. But still, when we think about generally who has power, who has data, who has ability to produce these tools which will serve many tasks, including policy making. I would like to ask you, Slobodan, do you think that this gap, which is related to small and big languages, will produce also a gap in terms of governments of small countries or countries with small languages, say, in trying to get to the same level like others, and whether this will create actually a new rift between very developed countries and those less developed?
Yeah, I think that it is already happening, and this is why I mentioned it as one of the blind spots of our national strategy for AI. And let me explain this. The fact that ChatGPT is speaking Serbian is a side effect of it being fed a part of Serbia, a small amount of Serbian, or relatively small amount of Serbian text in this training corpus. So these large language models work by analyzing, volumes of text, analyzing text in context, and extracting from them implicit rules on how language is constructed. So when you serve it a certain amount of text in Serbian, it will learn, so to speak, how to construct the grammatically correct Serbian Serbian sentences. But it's important to know that you need also to fine-tune these models, to basically make them follow instructions. All the things that you can do with ChatGPT, like summarize this text or make a list of these things, etc. And also to steer these models, to steer these answers away from unwanted or toxic language, or something which is not culturally acceptable. And these fine-tunings were done primarily for English language. And it's important to understand that this AI revolution, and including ChatGPT, is basically is based on decades of public investment and also huge private investment by the big tech companies in annotating these data sets and making these data sets for various uses. All of this hasn't been done for Serbian language because they don't have financial incentives to support Serbian language, because we're a small community and low-income community, so we're a low priority for them. So you can see this when you use ChatGPT, for example. It mixes Ekavian and Iekavian pronunciation of Serbian. It cannot. It gives completely historically and I would say socially unacceptable answers in our cultural context. For instance, I asked it about the assassination of our Prime Minister Đinđić, and it started spewing conspiracy theories about the third bullet. And generally, try talking with ChatGPT about Serbian history. It's hilarious. And also, I mean, it will give you answers in similar languages for some topics that it hasn't seen during training. I asked it about the law on electronic communications. It gave me an answer in Slovenian. How this can be improved? Of course, it can be improved by investing in these data sets for fine-tuning of the large language models. And who needs to do this? I think that the government has a big role in supporting this, because the private sector just cannot justify huge investments into this. They cannot, sell enough copies of this software on the Serbian market and, make a return on investment. So government has a big role in this. And small language communities do invest in these things. Like, for instance, Estonia has been investing for the past 10 years around €1 million on their language technology program. Denmark, 4 million. Israel, 2.5 million. A small language community like Iceland, with only 300,000 speakers, they invested 13 million. And maybe to mention Slovenia, which is more closer to us, they invested over €4 million over the past 3 or 4 years into improving language technologies so that Slovenian can be better understood and processed using AI tools, not only text, but also converting speech to text and synthesizing speech from text. So, I mean, this situation, I think this rift is already visible. My children are, conversing with Siri in English because there is no Serbian support. And in the age that, is coming with AI and VR, when you put these glasses, you have to switch to voice as a primary means of interacting with computers. And, if Serbian is not supported, you need to switch to some other language. So I think that, this situation is not going to improve, I would say. And this is why I said that, the government needs to focus more on this in the time to come.
Thank you. Now, Tiago, I will ask you one question we always ask somebody from the World Bank. So when we see governments from the countries which don't have enough money for something and anything, we always turn to the World Bank and to ask, would you support the governments in these tasks? And would you also support them in introducing artificial intelligence in their policy making? So can you foresee World Bank coming or saying in Serbia, now we think that this is like very important questions and we will do a lot and invest a lot in Serbian language to become like one of the very important languages for GPT or any model of that kind, and we will also invest in the government to use artificial intelligence in policy making?
I'm going to give you the answer that every World Bank person gives. No, I'm actually going to answer that at this time different. So no, just to start, I think I was lucky enough. I think I was like probably the first person at the bank to start applying AI in the public sector, and was about 7 years ago in Brazil, because in Brazil to open a business is a nightmare. If you want to open a gas station, you need about 200 licenses to start operating. So unless you're very rich, and that's why most like gas station owners in Brazil are kind of like money barons. And we saw that one of the big problems for that, but for other issues, was environmental licensing, which was extremely complex. And in Brazil, it's seen as extremely complex. So in Brazil, you have what is called the consultants on environmental licensing, in which you go to them and they do the process of environmental licensing for you. It's a middleman, right? I mean, their offices are in front of the office of environmental licensing in Brazil. So we started to use AI, to pilot the use of AI based on the knowledge that we had, on the corpus that we had, to have a bot. When people came to the website, the first thing that we do is like, don't go to a consultant just yet. I will try to walk you through the process here, and we do. And we got some good success, right? But the issue at the time that we couldn't do this and scale this and take this to other countries, right, was the capacity of the technology of the time of handling unstructured data, right? All the unstructured data that is the knowledge. So everything related to fancy use of technology in other countries, in developing countries, Serbia is a bit different because of a high technological capacity, but most countries that we work, it is that to use technology or leverage something, normally you need some good data before, and they don't have it, right? So what is new, and I hate to say every time there's something, a democratizing effect, is not this, but what is new here in terms of opportunity, it is because developing countries have lots of unstructured data, right? And that data is there readily, very easy to seize, and that can lead to a whole new generation of services. I think there's lots of services that it can be doing. I mean, we're in conversation with UNDP on how we can leverage AI through projects here. So just to answer, yes, we are ready. We normally just need a request from the government for us to do that. So as soon as we get a request, we're happy to help. We have a project that the goal is to leverage technology to improve public services. So, and there I can say there are like quite a good amount of resources to be doing that. But then it becomes one thing about, if artificial intelligence is the solution, what's the problem, right? And then comes the other issue, which is the vision of government or difficulty of government coming with what in the technology sector we say use cases, right? What I'm going to use artificial intelligence for? I think one here on making those tools more accessible to everybody and investing in language for that, it is fantastic, right? But what about when it comes to the delivery of public services? And I think that here comes down to another difficulty that we see observed in Serbia, but in most countries, which is a difficulty in having a vision of service design, right? Or put yourself in the shoes of the service user, right? I like to say, I won't say the case of Serbia, but Brazil. Most people who design health policies, public health policies, they have private health insurance. Most people who design transport policies have private drivers, right? So you have a huge empathy gap. The poorer the country, the less developed the country, the biggest the gap between who develops policies and those who use them, right? And that's where service design comes in, to try to bridge this empathy gap. And that's another thing that we're trying to do, because otherwise we can have all the solutions, but if we don't identify the problem, and particularly for those that we say like who needs it the most, we won't be able to deliver anything.
When you're talking about sympathy and also the way how governments think about how they can use artificial intelligence, I read one thing that, for example, artificial intelligence will be exquisitely used, for example, to read whatever we write on, for example, social networks. And for example, when you have riots like in Serbia, government will be able to understand within minutes what's the, how people feel about it. So in that sense, I would say like this also give us this perspective that those who actually decide about artificial intelligence have this specific position, and which also leads us to the importance of democracy in every way. But but this was just a small remark about that.
Just yeah. Moldova is already doing that. So they're leveraging artificial intelligence to get unstructured data on from citizen feedback. So they're starting to do this so that they can identify how to improve services, and then to identify use cases that potentially could be using for AI.
Exactly, but that was like in a good direction, but it can be also vice versa. But we were talking here a lot about data, but we also know that people were collecting, before artificial intelligence, people were collecting a lot of data on their own. So when we think, for example, about AI learning something, it needs a lot of data to learn something, for example, that we know. Like, that's why I would like to ask you, Boban, like when you are thinking, where would you use artificial intelligence and the data artificial intelligence is learning upon? And when you think about human knowledge, to know that to know a lot of things about energy and what is going on and disasters and everything, where do you see this line between human experience and the knowledge we have as civilization, and something that artificial intelligence may tell us that we cannot grasp in spite of these ages of learning about things?
Okay, that's something that we talked a few years ago. I was frustrated because we use some artificial intelligence methods such as neural networks, and then learn them using some data sets from scratch. But we totally neglect the knowledge that we have as a humanity, knowledge that is collected for years. For example, I'm very interested in physical laws. Why should we learn?
Exactly. It's coming from the space.
Now we can now measure various variables from nature, but also from society. And why we train neural networks to learn something from data only if we already have knowledge about physical laws that underlying some natural phenomenon. And because of that, there are two kinds of models. We have physical-based models that are used for decades and even centuries. On the other hand, we have new kinds of models, data-driven, so-called data-driven models. And now we have some hybrid kind of models that uses data to learn something, but also uses some knowledge about physical laws that we have. So these models are better because they don't need too many data to learn something because they have some underlying physical laws, but also they are good because they keep outcomes from models within some physically feasible ranges, which is not the case when we use a model that uses only data to learn something.
Thank you. Now I will build upon that to just a little bit to go further down in this question in a slightly different direction, saying like until now we were talking about how we can use artificial intelligence, what are some good sides and bad sides and so on. But we also tend to think about artificial intelligence as something that is, we were talking about it as something that it's not making mistakes as humans are making mistakes. But on the other hand, we also deal with artificial intelligence, which is learning on our mistakes. So apart from our knowledge, apart from physics laws, which are as they are, we also have different sorts of experience which are inbuilt in the simple things like how we choose people to fill some positions, then getting more white men than for example, women or so on. And so we are dealing with a lot of our mistakes, which we have somehow to address. And here I will turn to Branka actually to now turn back to this legal issues which have to somehow cure also human mistakes by being applied to artificial intelligence.
Yeah, let me then start also from the beginning, because I think all this relates. And if you're talking about implications of algorithmic management and AI on work processes, we're discussing one aspect of our life. Not all of us are engaged in this problem, but some of us are. And I'm going to go back to the workers that we've been researching for a number of years. Just briefly about that impact, that is really important. So if you're having algorithmic management as a machine, as a technology that organizes work, then you're also implying certain deficiencies that this system brings. So you always have a question of discrimination. So one person is always discriminating over the other. You can call it discrimination, you can call it bias, you can call it also dynamic pricing. Depends which angle you're taking. But this is a place where the work really matters. So I'm going to give another, or maybe the example that I'm using all the time, how you can actually have the implication of AI on two workers that are sitting at the same location, are actually being asked to deliver the same package. Still, the machine is going to decide and choose one over the other. We can think that maybe this is like a rational decision, but maybe it is not. Maybe this machine has decided on one over the other because of, let's say, gender, maybe because of the age, maybe because of all other things. So this is how, for example, machines or algorithmic management and impact on work processes. Going further, trying to respond to your question, We are now talking about biases when it comes to larger populations. So you can have a bias, let's say in financial terms, you can decide to, let's say, give a credit to somebody who has so-called better rating status. But how do you decide who has a better rating status? All different inputs go into this equation, and this is how you make, as a machine or algorithmic device, a decision. And this is one of the biases that people actually talk about widely: socioeconomic bias, gender bias, racial bias, political bias, and so on and so forth. And all these biases, in a way, impact on work processes as well. So if we take all those elements and come up with a result that is to be like a just place for all of us, actually, I don't have an answer. I only think that regulation is going to slow down. I see some skeptical views from the audience, but I believe that regulation is the only way forward, because we had 20 years of unregulated space. So at least with some regulatory attempts, at least with some thinking in this way, we are going to maybe impact and give ourselves time to improve the system that is really, like, now accelerating at phenomenal speed. So that would be, let's say, my take on the future and on the current status, and that's all that I can say.
Okay, so we were talking about legislation. We were talking about how things can be implemented. But when we talk about this implementation with for example, problems with discrimination and so on, they are all anchored in language, basically, in a way. Because let's say, but these language models, whenever for example, discrimination, it is anchored in language. So it is giving us sometimes our ugly picture of what we said in the past. So I was wondering, Slobodan, this is a question first for you. Do you think that how we can cure the language? Because all these models, they are based on whatever we said in the past. So we can regulate something, but how we can regulate and fix language which is as it is?
Yeah, and I'll respond to that, but I also want to reflect to something that Branka said. There's a lot of talk recently about, aligning AI models, aligning them to better follow, human needs, human instructions, and in the end, not to harm humans. But, we often forget that we haven't been too successful in aligning, human relations. So this is why we have, various inequality, gender inequality, income inequality, wars. So women on average terrible with regulating technologies in general, starting from fire or wheel or, modern technologies, like, for instance, cars. When the cars were invented, one of the first laws regulating cars were limiting the speed of cars, so not to be faster than horses. Or, they mandated people with flags running in front of cars, warning pedestrians. Some of these laws were repealed only in the 20s, in the 1920s. And it wasn't until the Second World War and even after that we got, safety features in cars, like, belts and airbags. So there's a lot of, there was an evolution in dealing with these technologies. And, the only problem with AI is that, we don't have time. The pace of change is really tremendous. And I'm afraid that, due to global connectivity, the consequences will also be much worse. So, how to solve it, it's really hard to say. But, keeping human in the loop would be a good principle. Not only a human in the loop in a sense that you have humans who are monitoring the data that are ingested by these models, but also monitoring how models behave in practice. for instance, to detect various biases and then correct them in the data sets and retrain the model. Then to monitor, to ensure basically that the results of the models do not produce immediate effects, but that you can, that someone basically decides, before releasing bombs, or, before stripping someone from, I don't know, social care or health insurance, so that these decisions are not fully automated. And I mean, we will have to do a lot of trial and error as well. I'm afraid, it's not going to be it's going to be a bumpy ride, I think. This European Union's risk-based approach is, I think, sensible in this situation. They're not trying to basically regulate the AI as a technology, but to focus on some areas and basically determine the risk of application of AI in certain areas, and say, like, these kinds of applications have a grave dangers for democracy or for human rights, and then we will, ban some technologies. Why not? I mean, or attach some transparency obligations or other obligations. So it makes sense. But I mean, as I said, we will have to build capacity for dealing with this in all of our agencies, in RATEL, in ALIMS, in, agency for traffic safety, etc. So I mean, it will take time.
But when you think about like how many data we needed and to train this and to also leave space for artificial intelligence to develop and so on and so forth, we still have to think about how it was built. It was built on someone's knowledge, on someone's creative work, on someone's work in art or wherever. So what do you think, where is this let's say a balance between those two, like because we now see that these models will more or less face the same issues, like for example Facebook or Google, which were built based on something that used to belong to a person who really produced that. So what do you think, Tiago, where do you think is the let's say this nice way of thinking what we should invest in these models to make them better, and how we can protect what should be protected, or it was protected before the invention of these large language models?
Yeah, I mean, if I had the answer, I would write a book and be a wealthy man somewhere. No, look, I think that when all these things on how we deal with all the challenges that come, and as you said, it's moving very fast, right? The most essential thing is to approach regulation in a different way, right? I mean, and this goes also into building capacity of parliament and legislators, right? Last time we saw technologists go into legislative branches around the world, it is a horror show, right? In terms of the lack of understanding of those technologies, right? So that leads to some problems, right? And we might start needing to think of legislation in another way, so that in case you make some, I'm going to give an example. Is GDPR a good initiative? Great. But when you hear from the private sector, many of them are going to say, I'll never be able to comply 100% with it. Maybe you might have some thoughts on this, right? And I'm not saying, oh, let's scrape it. But how can we think in even new models of regulate that have like some notion of dynamic regulation, right? The mode of regulating the world was built in a time that these technologies didn't exist, and it doesn't respond. It's the same way. A government likes to build software, to buy software, in the same way that they buy bridges and roads, which leads to a disaster, right? The same way is true regulation. We used to regulate things that issues that they would persist and remain unchanged for 50, 100 years, right? Now it's changing by the minutes. So I wouldn't dare to say what is the solution. I would just say that we need to start by thinking kind of like how to make new regulation mechanisms that are more dynamic, flexible, and iterative. Because if we try to lock into a solution now, a year later, we might be regretting, and then it's too difficult to change that.
Thank you. Anyone who
I would like
yes?
to respond to that. Because I think that EU AI Act is right on that path. And it is considered and conceived as a dynamic piece of legislation. I'm not saying that this is the best what we have. I'm just saying that we need something, that we need regulatory intervention in order to slow down the processes and find out maybe better solutions in this very challenged situation. And briefly about GDPR. Yeah, it took quite a few years for the GDPR to pick up. We see that 2022 is maybe the best year for GDPR rulings in terms of at least Meta was sued on so many fronts in different EU countries. But we also see now, and I will stop there, last week we know that OpenAI has been sued by a Californian law firm because of data privacy breaches. So all these data that were built in these language models was somebody's belongings. So, you know, I took from you, and they made a model. Fine, I mean, it's nice, but then let's think how we can actually make a just distribution of all this wealth that is going to be, in the end, ending in the hands of OpenAI.
Thank you. Now it's time to ask, because we are already debating, and the time is moving fast. Are there any questions, remarks? Because I know that in public we have as many experts as here or more. So are there any questions or remarks or something you would like to add? Yes?
I don't need the mic, but no problem. I'm wondering whether we can have a legislation against over-regulation, because very often legislation is very constraining our creativity, innovativity, and usually legislation don't understand technology. And for instance, we at the Belgrade Metropolitan University, we have been doing research already 10 years in personalization of education and adaptive systems and so on. But if we have regulation as we have now in education, we cannot implement this. Even today we had an inspection and we are going to be punished because we are implementing some very advanced approaches, but this is not implemented in the regulations because they are very old and very constrained, and they don't permit creativity and innovation. So in my opinion, regulation is necessary, but it depends on the application area. Regulation has to public interest, but who knows what is the public interest, for instance, in our case, in education. We have the responsibility to educate students and to provide a good quality, good efficiency, but we know the best, what is good. After all, the market will show. Our goal is to satisfy employers because they pay for the quality that we produce. So they should regulate us if any regulation is necessary, but not those who don't know the processes, don't understand it. For instance, combine rule-based approach and machine learning approach because not only data-driven knowledge is necessary, but also rule-based is also. So I'm mixing this. And we are developing. But then again, when we talk about data set, educational data set, we are constrained with personality. Even we we don't see names and everything. Again, we have problems in that. And I don't want to explore more than that, but I just want to ask you, how do you think this? Because when you talk in general about legislation, it's too general. It depends on the application area, it depends what we want to protect, which interest we want to protect. We have some regulation that is really against innovations because those who have influence on regulators constrain those who are more advanced. And that's very negative for education in Serbia. I suppose in other areas there are such cases. So we must be very careful about legislation. Sometimes it's better not to have any legislation than have worse and bad regulations. Because especially in this area, we have to hurry up, we have to speed up our approaches and so on. We don't have to regulate. For instance, in medical area, regulations are killing all these applications and all these advances because when you regulate everything is already too late. Too late for some patient, but not too late to those who are developing this approach because new technologies are coming again and so on. So legislation is an issue that must be considered very carefully. Thank you.
More comments or questions? Yes.
So there are many issues, many ideas, many things we think we should do. But my question for me, and also for us, is there some approach you really believe can work?
Is it a question for a human?
For ChatGPT.
Well, I agree fully with Professor Domazet on the need to basically remove obstacles or cut red tape so technologies can, work in the public sector. And it's visible not only in the government, but also in the education as well. And there are huge opportunities in medical space as well. But we've been traditionally moving slow on these things. And when something happens like COVID, you realize overnight that, things that we've been postponing for years, like digital textbooks or portals for students and teachers are actually possible. I mean, it wasn't maybe good for students to be online for too long, but I mean, these things were considered like, we need 5 years to introduce learning portals. It's not true, of course. And the same thing goes for e-government as well. In many instances, we saw that it's not too complicated to get rid of stamps and appearing somewhere in person to sign something. But I am afraid that there are no shortcuts. And I mean, I've been advocating for this position, since 10 years ago for e-government. I knew that basically, if we want to make this reality, we have to remove the obligation to sign something or, put a stamp on something in a lot of legal documents. So we have to remove these legislation, these obstacles from to use, for instance, the systems that the professor mentioned. All legislation that is currently forbidding this, and also build capacity in the institutions who are implementing this legislation, like Zavod za unapređenje obrazovanja I vaspitanja or the Commission for Accreditation. So they don't actually find institutions that implement new technologies. Or at least, I would expect from these institutions to adopt the guidelines and say, at least there are the guidelines, what you should do or shouldn't do, but not, go with the fines. So I mean, in this regard, I think that this is doable, but it requires a lot of work, and I don't think that there are, you know, workarounds.
Okay.
No, I already. Oh, on what works and what doesn't work in front of this. I mean, if we're like a gloomy and doom, we're all gonna die kind of stuff. I mean, it can happen, but it's difficult, huh? And I mean, but I do agree. We might regulate things. I mean, when it comes to technology, the world is littered with well-intentioned regulations that later stifle innovation, right? So I think we need to be thinking of that a lot, right? But if you said, if the EU is going in the direction of dynamic, and I wasn't talking about the EU in general, I was talking about governments willing to regulate. And there's one more thing, regulating even at the EU level. I mean, I worked in a region, right? Many firms, they can go operate in other areas, right? Where there's very little regulation and very way to do oversight. So there's also an issue more about global governance here that is just not about regional governance and so on. That is much more complex than we'd like. And until so far, global governance in terms of human history has been mostly a failure. Let's be very frank, right? So.
It's like, now me, sparking the discussion. I think that there is no worries when it comes to regulation in Serbia. There is none. So the question is when it is going to happen. When it comes to innovation, there are many different approaches, and I can again talk about UK approach, I can talk about EU approach, and all these approaches have space for innovation. In the EU Act, it is called sandbox, and so on and so forth. So, you know, everybody is taking care of this interest because we're now talking about a race. So no country, no entity wants to lose this privilege of also being an economic power, not only like regulated power. I mean, that's fine, but you know, you want both. So that would be my thinking on, let's say, the future when it comes to regulation. Needs to take both sides into equation. Answer to your question, I don't know. But for example, knowing all different approaches, you know, we can discuss China, we can discuss Brazil, we can discuss the US. I think it is the best that works for us. So we need to find a piece or pieces of regulation that work for this entity here. We can, of course, copycat, as we did many times in the past. We can copycat GDPR, we can copycat whatever, but I think that what we need to do is to find our own way, and maybe this is the way, you know, kind of soft regulation. Maybe that is Serbian way. Okay, I was thinking Boban would.
No, I can answer that. I can answer that. I'm not an optimist because humanity has never become smart until disaster.
Yes.
I'm not an expert, I'm a journalist. And as a journalist, of course, I have a question which is maybe a little bit different. Before talking about limitations, regulations, and so on, I'm wondering who is going to be the one who will put the priorities in all the public sectors where artificial intelligence will be used, introduced and used. For example, energy sector, education, health. We will always wonder what will be the first priority that we want that we want this artificial intelligence to be used for. Is it going to be efficiency? I don't know, money, new jobs for people? Who is going to actually put all these regulations in these sectors? Who will be the one who will be deciding before we have all these wonderful things going on in Serbia or anywhere else? Do you have an idea where it begins actually then?
So, future?
Well, what I see in the public sector, I mean, I see the huge potentials of the technology, and but I see that in public sector you don't have many people who are aware of these possibilities, and where thinking about policies, they usually just skip this because they're not aware of the possibilities. So one important aspect would be to talk more about these possibilities and make the institution aware of what can be done. And when they're thinking about policies, sectoral policies, rightfully they're not thinking AI first. They are thinking how to improve services for citizens, or how to improve outcomes of in the health sector. So I mean it's absolutely valid, but there is a use of AI in all of this, and I can help in this regard, and they have to know and do apply technologies to help the outcomes. So I mean, I'm afraid that the institutions themselves who articulate the policies, which are then voted in the government. But it comes from the institutions, from the sectors themselves. We'll have to be those who are educated and who articulate this. But of course, and I will refer again to this ethical framework, I think that how these technologies are implemented in sectors have to be the subject of public debate, and there has to be a level of transparency included, and there has to be a human in the loop as well.
Just to say, I find this question excellent. There's that saying that laws are like sausages. You don't want to know how it's made. I would say innovation in the public sector is a bit like that. We would like to think that there's a criteria, right? Is it efficiency? It is improving human well-being. It's like promoting human agency, or like how are you going to define? I mean, I'm not talking about Serbia. I'm talking about my perception in general, working in several countries. It's random. It is totally random. Actually, if you want to randomize, if you don't have a lottery in the country, use public sector innovation, where it's going to happen next, because it's going to be totally impossible to predict. Which brings to, I think, a more fundamental question, even before regulation, which we agree is important, done rightly. It is, what's the governance of innovation in the public sector, right? Who's going to decide what values we want to pursue, and so on and so forth? Who participates? Right? For example, I was in the UK, very interesting decision where the government requested us, but this is a work that I do not as a World Bank, but with University of Southampton, on biotechnology, right? And we had a huge debate, right? Because according to some people, it should be those who will benefit from a new limb. I mean, somebody who doesn't have a leg, somebody who has 2 legs should be deciding on behalf who is suffering without a limb. Right? That's a big dilemma, right? And if we don't start thinking about these things in terms of innovation, it's going to continue to be random. So I think this is excellent and brings to this question of creating a structure of governance to define first what values we want to pursue, but also defining who defines which these values are, which will be on a case-by-case basis, most likely.
Shall we finish on this in this note? Yes. Let's say on values. Values. Yes. So more questions, or we're finishing now? Yes.
Thank you, everybody. It was a very interesting debate. And my name is Anna Morokvašić. I have been in the sphere of development of high technologies since I was a kid, because both of my parents are electrical engineers from ETF. to make a Thank you. I'm just missing the word right now. So I grew up with, although I'm basically initially from an analog generation, I did grow up with high technologies from the age of 13 or 14 when it emerged in Serbia. And I've been very interested in these topics since that age. And then throughout my schooling, throughout my education. So what I'm pondering upon these topics a lot in my spare time and in my professional roles, and it's mostly philosophical. Like I'm philosophizing about and what's the ethical aspects, and we've touched upon many of these today. So I'm wondering, do you think that there is a kind of a discriminatory approach with regards to the fact that not everybody has access to internet, not everybody has access to computers, laptops, tablets? I mean, there are still, I don't know the statistics right now, but I've known these numbers throughout years, so I know that a lot of the earth is not covered with these, what we now consider basic computer technologies. And we are now talking about something that is way beyond all of this. So I'm just wondering what your kind of general view is of the development of the whole of, if we take the whole humanity, like humanity as a whole, not everybody has the same opportunities to grow in this aspect. So yeah, I hope it wasn't too big. Thank you.
I just found the answer yesterday. I was talking to a colleague from UNICEF, and there is a project, a global project called MEGA, or maybe GIGA, or alike, that is aiming to introduce globally technology to schools by 2030, according to SDGs. And I was really impressed yesterday. He was at the panel where Sloba and I participated. I didn't know about it. So some organizations, talking about multi-stakeholder dialogue, which is a very popular term, people are getting engaged. For us as a research organization, in the past, we would be only researchers, but now we are advocating for change. And of course, at the center of our work is workers. So we are actually approaching all this sphere from the worker side. Going back to your question, UNICEF is doing that work. And I just found out about it yesterday. Maybe there are many other projects of a similar kind. This is on a positive note. On a negative note, going back to pessimistic views, this is a race. This is an arms race. So societies that are disadvantaged according to different criteria are probably going to remain disadvantaged, even with all these computers in schools, because some other kids in some other societies are going to have access to these computers first. And this now matters.
Thank you.
And just on Branka's note, I mean, the digital divide is real and huge and widening. I mean, we have more than 2 billion people who don't have either computers or the internet globally. But what is what I think is important in this debate is for us to understand that we cannot first solve other more pressing issues and then take on the AI. I mean, we will have to do this in parallel. And there's a same kind of debate in many areas. I've been hearing for ages about, why you're introducing computers in school, why, they haven't solved the problems with toilets. So it's a valid point. We have to solve both of these problems, but we cannot do them sequentially. We have to do them in parallel. So that would be, an important point. We do have to solve these gaps, but we just if we don't do something here, we'll fall behind, and it's going to be, we'll have a bigger problem down the line.
I mean, I agree with the parallel approach, although I would say the last effort to give everybody computers, one laptop per child, was a massive failure. So normally the way that it increases is by improving quality of schools and issues like that, and having the economic growth, right? I mean, because you put computer, there's no electricity. You put like the solar battery, it has another problem. So it's a difficult problem, but doesn't mean we have to stop and give up, right? So initiatives like these are welcome, and we should be learning. But just want to think about, I think there is an opportunity here precisely in terms of inclusion when you're talking about these things. Because before you needed the internet and you needed to even download an application, right? So, but there's this notion that was from the 90s, but then now started to become a reality. It's kind of like the thin client or the zero client, in which everything is running somewhere else. And you just need a phone without internet access. Then you can call something voice-based, which has internet to access, machine learning, and you are accessing everything. So in this respect, this AI particularly is democratizing that. And it's not just a thinking. In India already, they have a large program of farm subsidies, and they have had a very low level of enrollment, because it was an online form where you had to go to a super far village. So what they created, they got together ChatGPT, plus their language program that they have been working for years, and that's why they could do it. They brought these together, plus a kind of like the form, and now people they think they're talking to a person. It's like an interview, but what is happening is that online form is being filled over the internet. So you do have like this kind of solutions. There's also a democratizing effect there. But again, this will widen the gap between people, rich and poor, the have and have-nots. When technology comes, the haves benefits always the most. It's unfortunately that's the case. Some people will know how to use ChatGPT better, to do better prompts. Others will be just asking about curiosities or about, it was just like the internet, right? Some people will read books, other people look picture of cats. So this is a bigger problem that is very difficult to overcome.
Thanks. Just to add to this in 2 sentences, I think I'm not optimistic either about the widening of the digital divides and the inequalities and so on due to AI. But I think for a middle-income country like Serbia, it's a different set of things, and it's not just what Sloba said. So it's about getting the technology right, but then there will be other things. It's also mainly, actually, I think, about getting the policies right. Because we've had computers in schools for a very long time, and they have not changed a lot of how we do school. And we have had electronic systems in almost every bigger public system for a very long time, and they have not done that much to actually transform the way that these systems work. So if a little bit of future-proofing in that institutional and policy space would probably go along, would give us much bigger results than actually making sure that we have enough technology so that everybody can reach it. Yeah.
Okay. Shortly, let's be honest. This world is built on discrimination. And we always had exploiters and exploited. The new with artificial intelligence is that we will have one more class of useless and unnecessary people. That's pessimistic, but...
Read today, actually, an article about New Zealand, what they are doing with AI. They use it in the health sector to help Maori population that have the rate of death at birth and so on, a lot of health issues because they're underprivileged. They created an AI system which looks at all of them and then prioritizes the surgeries for population, including them, but in most cases them. And it already has proven that they've got data, first of all. The thing is, okay, where is the data? And
that could be some of the advantages of the system. So first they got the data, and then they introduced geographic location, underprivileged societies, and a lot of other things, and they're now deciding on the cues for surgeries. We are very familiar with those issues based on those criteria as well, who can afford what. So that's one of the things. And also on an interesting note for Professor Dometi, this month Harvard announced that for their very famous course Coding, that's course number 50, they now allow artificial intelligence during the in computer science course, but they produce their own way of using it to help students find bugs in what they do. So they teach them how basically to rely on AI, but not just take it for granted and do their problem sets by using ChatGPT, because it's a reality. So I felt like sharing those things. There are things that are some cases which give us some hope and promising examples. And this was a very interesting panel. I think we could all sit for quite some time here and continue. That's my feeling. So thank you for sharing and giving all the views.
Okay, so let me try for a second time to end up on a positive note, and to say that now you maybe even in Belgrade can see the stars. So, and let's finish that with the hope that we really had a good idea of starting these conversations, and that we should proceed with that and have more discussions and panels about AI under the stars. We hope to see you soon. We hope that you will spread the word that it was a nice evening in spite of being a little bit warm, and that we will see each other very soon. Thank you all.